Hey, what's going on, everybody? So, you know what? It looks like Star Wars Visions is actually pretty cool. I was really kind of surprised. We're going to talk about it right now.
You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel, and unfortunately, Darryl's having some technical problems. He's trying to get on, so hopefully he'll actually be on because, as you guys know, this is a discussion show. I really don't like to do these things on my own, but I did not want to hold you guys up, especially for a really cool discussion like that. I mean, Star Wars Visions, I have to say, a big shout out to Ronaldo, one of our regular viewers, because he's the one that basically said, hey, we should cover this. And Ronaldo, he's on now. He's saying, you know what? The whole thing was freaking amazing. Don't worry, I got your back, which is good because, like I said, this is totally unplanned, so I can't even display the chats tonight because not really set up for that. Had to scramble and get something happening. So again, hopefully Darryl hops on this thing so that way, we can have more of a discussion, but we got Ronaldo. And Ronaldo, you're the one that actually suggested that we cover this. And you know what? I am glad that you did because I have to tell you guys, I was really kind of shocked by how much I really enjoyed this. So for a little bit of background, for those of you who don't know, Star Wars Visions is basically a project that Lucasfilm approached a bunch of animators from Japan, like a bunch of Japanese animation companies, and they're the ones that ended up creating in the style of Japanese animation. So this is a total Japanese anime thing. I mean, this isn't just, somebody doing something in the style of Japanese anime. This is full-on Japanese anime. Now, I actually was trying to decide. Darryl and I were talking about this, and it was like, do we review the whole series at once, or do we do episode by episode? And given the fact that this was essentially done really more or less on an episodic basis, and every episode is completely different, we thought it would probably be a good idea to just take each of these episodes individually. So we got Joanne with us, we got Dwight with us. They're all saying hi to each other in the chat right now, which is good. Unfortunately, we don't have Darryl with us yet. So hopefully, like I said, he jumps on. Because, again, I wasn't really prepared to talk about this on my own. But you know what? This one's going to be kind of easy because I got to tell you guys, man, this whole Star Wars Visions thing, I was not initially into talking about this at all. In fact, it wasn't until this past Friday when Ronaldo and a few other people that were chatting were like, hey, cover Star Wars Visions, and they sort of got me intrigued by it. And, at first I thought that this thing was just going to be this out of left field thing, and there was really no reason to have it or anything like that, but I was wrong. What can I tell you guys? I am so glad that you guys convinced me to watch this because it is really cool. And I am a fan of Japanese anime, by the way. I love Fist of the North Star, Vampire Hunter D. I haven't really watched it in a long time, I have to be honest, but I would say sometime in the early to mid-90s, I got really super into anime. So let's actually jump into this. So this is basically set in an alternate history. And this takes place about 20 years, this episode. We're talking about episode 1, the Duel, by the way. This takes place 20 years after the fall of the feudal Jedi Empire. And a lone wanderer known only as Ronin witnesses a legion of stormtroopers attempting to besiege a small village. And he ends up fighting the leader of these bandits, who's a self-declared Dark Lord of the Sith. And she's really cool. She's armed with this heavily modified lightsaber that I can only describe as kind of like a Japanese katana lightsaber shoved through a tube kind of like an umbrella-like structure, and then sort of coming out and becoming multiple lightsabers. I mean, this thing is really cool. I'm not even sure how the physics of this thing actually works, but I was pretty intrigued, I have to say. It was pretty cool. But anyway, he has this droid, right? And what I really like about it is they incorporate a lot of the Star Wars stuff, but it's really heavily influenced by the old samurai films. And basically, you see a lot of that, right? Like the R2 unit basically has one of those like Japanese, like hat type things that they wear. I forgot what they're called actually, but it's really cool because it's sort of like a mixture of technology, but very much rooted in feudal Japan. So it's really interesting. But while the droid is actually saving the villagers from these stormtrooper bandits or whatever, Ronan, pretty much, who we learn is a former Sith Lord, ends up taking on this self-proclaimed Dark Lord of the Sith woman. And, he lures her into a trap and he kills her. And then at the end, Ronan's shown to basically be collecting kyber crystals, like red kyber crystals from Sith lightsabers. And he basically decides to give it to the village chief and more or less says, you know what, this thing can ward off evil. And it kind of ends. And it was basically directed, and again, this is done by different Japanese animation studios, right? So Takanobu Mizuno was the director of this thing, Takashi Okazaki was the writer, and then Kamikaze Duga was the animator. So I thought that it was really cool because it was very true to the whole style of Japanese anime, which, it's black and white basically, except for the fact that, and I wouldn't even say black and white, it's kind of more of a black and white / sepia kind of thing. And it was really interesting to me because they did use color, but they would use color pretty much to highlight the technology, which I thought was actually a really, really cool thing. Dwight says it's like a what if. And it really is. And I was reading on to some of the other episodes because I was really intrigued on what else. Because I was wondering, basically, when I saw this one episode, I was like, well, so is this thing kind of, is it always going to be like this? Or are all the episodes vastly different? And pretty much all the episodes are vastly different. All the episodes are pretty much taking place at different times, different situations. Some of them are borrowing from canon more heavily than others. And I had to tell you guys, man, I am really, really into this series right off the bat. Like, just instantly, I was drawn to this thing because it's so different. It's so weird. On one hand, it's unlike anything that you've ever seen in Star Wars, but on the other hand, it's exactly what Lucas was inspired by when he created Star Wars. Ronaldo says, did you notice that the bandits wear the uniforms of stormtroopers of the First Order? Yes, I did. I did notice that. I thought that was actually a really cool little thing. Because, and actually I noticed there was a lot of different things. Like I said, they definitely combined a lot of the old school feudal Japan style, way back when, very almost antiquated, but it was combined with the technology. And it was kind of tripping me because you guys probably noticed this. They had all the really cool, all the sounds. The sound design was exactly what we would have expected from Star Wars. I mean, it was really cool. And it was different because it almost seemed out of place. In some ways, I have to say that I think that it was included in there in order to pretty much bring some continuity into it, make it feel Star Wars-y. But to be honest, it almost took me out of the story. when I heard some of that stuff. Ronaldo also says another reference to the sequels that they used the Kylo Ren's theme. They did, and actually Ronan kind of had he sort of had a Kylo Ren vibe, but he also had a very typical Japanese samurai warrior type vibe to me too. White noticed the same thing. Ronaldo says something positive about Star Wars Visions is that there are elements that maybe in Clone Wars or Rebel style animations would not work, but in anime they work really well. And yeah, I think that a lot of this has to do with the fact that they were really trying to give this its own spin. You guys have to remember that what they're trying to do with this thing is say, okay, you have the world of Star Wars. What would happen if actual Japanese anime studios got a hold of this and they created their own anime, but using elements of Star Wars? In other words, telling the anime in the style of Star Wars. So, I think that you're right. It wouldn't necessarily work in a traditional Star Wars setting, nor would it work in a traditional style Star Wars animation style. I think that that is something else that you basically have to look at too, is that instead of looking at this like a Star Wars story that's done in the style of anime, you really have to look at it more like it's anime that's influenced by Star Wars. See, Ronaldo also says, for example, the Sith girl's lightsaber is something that can only be seen well in anime style. Yeah. Again, in some ways, it had somewhat of a General Grievous vibe to me. But it was definitely something that I think, yeah, it screamed anime. I was amazed. And the Sith girl, she was actually voiced by Lucy Liu. I knew I recognized her voice, too, by the way. So, I think that that's something that, you know, while you're definitely, while it's definitely done in the anime style, I think that Star Wars definitely lends itself to that, but at the same time, I think that what's happening and what you're going to find with this series, and again, I don't know, because even though I know all this stuff was released all at once, which is actually unlike Disney Plus, by the way. I don't know about you guys, but I was really surprised that they actually just released all the episodes at once, because their whole model has been that they wanted to release one episode per week, and they wanted to make it so where you were consuming it so everybody was talking about the same thing at the same time and everything else. Now, my theory behind that, and I'm definitely curious to hear you guys, whether you're chatting with us live or whether you leave the comment in the comment section right after you smash that like button and hit that subscribe button. See what I did there? Because I almost wonder if they released all the episodes at once because the episodes were pretty much unrelated to each other. I have a feeling that if this were more of a serial-based series, so you take The Mandalorian, for example, you basically have it to where it's a growing or continuing story. Whereas this, every episode is essentially, in fact, in a lot of cases, Lucasfilm actually they refer to this as short films. Now, that each episode is somewhere between, like, I don't know, 13 to 30 minutes or something like that. From what I understand, most of the episodes hang around the 15 to 20 minute mark. So they're not very long. And in fact, you guys are going to tell me out with this. It was the guy that did those Clone Wars shorts. I keep wanting to say it's Akira something, Kurosawa, or I don't know. You guys will have to help me out. I would look it up, but you know, it's me. That's usually Darryl's job. Which, by the way, he's restarting his computer. He really is trying to join us tonight. So, you know, kudos to Darryl for not just going, oh well, good luck, have fun with this, because Again, as you can probably tell, I really was not prepared to do this show solo. But yeah, I mean, I think it was really interesting that they decided to release this all at once, though, because I would actually argue that since these things are done in the style of short films, and they're actually done more in that Clone Wars short style, that they would have wanted to release them on a weekly basis. Simply because you have a situation where every single episode is wildly different. So Ronaldo says he's got a question. Would you like to see this story continue as an animated series, or do you prefer to remain as a single story? Being that we're only on the first episode, well, I can't even really say that, right? Because they've all been released. Now, one of the things that Darryl and I did say that we were going to do was we weren't even going to watch them all. Because, the temptation is go ahead and binge watch them, but just do reviews one at a time. And that's why it's too bad that he's not on tonight, because we also sort of made a pact that we weren't even going to talk about what we thought about it or whether we liked it or anything. We were just going to watch the first episode and then just have that reaction on the show tonight. So you're getting a little bit cheated on that, but at least you're getting my side of this thing. And I can tell you that it looks like to me they could actually take each one of these episodes and probably continue the storyline in its own series. So that's pretty much my thought on it. I'm not necessarily sure if I'm going to feel that way about every episode. I did read ahead to this. So I did read the synopsis of a lot of the episodes. Like, I know that the next one, episode 2, I forgot what it was called. I actually have it here. Oh yeah, Tatooine Rhapsody. It's like they follow some dude named Guy or something, and he ends up starting this band or whatever, and he's like a relative of Jabba, and then Jabba sends Boba Fett after him because instead of going into the whole crime syndicate thing, he chose to go into music. So, I mean, they got some really sort of weird storylines going with this thing. But it's intriguing because, honestly, I think what this means, and I think overall, my thought on this whole series is that it's going to breathe new life into Star Wars. And I think that that's why a lot of people are really excited about this series, and I can see why. Because you have a situation where you're not tied to the Skywalker saga. You're not tied down to any particular, character or whatever. It's like Dwight said, this really is more like the What If series. Another thing it reminds me of is what was it called? Oh, From a Certain Point of View. I should really know that. That was the title of one of our segments for a long time. It really reminds me of that, or the Legends of Luke Skywalker book that came out, where basically they talk about these wildly different stories, and it looks like we got Darryl here. You with me? All right. I hear you. Hey.
Yeah.
Man.
I know, man. It's crazy.
It's been rough, dude. I mean,
I don't know.
It's like I was telling the audience, I was really not prepared to do this. Like, a lot of them I could probably do on my own, no problem, but I purposely wanted to actually make this a total discussion thing. So I purposely blocked everything out of my mind because I just wanted to react and just have a discussion about it. So they've been listening to me yammer on about my thoughts on this thing.
Okay.
So why don't you give your overall thoughts on it, and I can kind of catch you up and...
Oh man, my overall thoughts. Visions the episode 1 was weird. I didn't understand the whole point of it. I mean, I got the point, but I didn't get the point. Like, there's no real story there for me. So it's just kind of like, what is this? I mean, it was very odd. I mean, it was cool in some ways, like some of the Force stuff was, or the battle, the lightsaber duel stuff was kind of cool, but outside of that, I mean, I was just kind of like,
I loved it.
was really hitting.
I
Wasn't hitting it
absolutely
for.
love this series. First of all, because I'm, like I said to the guys earlier, I'm a fan of Japanese anime, and you have to look at it more like it's not Star Wars done in an anime style. It really is Japanese anime. They used a bunch of Japanese animation studios to create this, and what they did was they used the Star Wars storyline and a lot of the canonical stuff to influence and tell original stories based on this. So in this first episode, as I kind of said to the guys, you had this guy named Ronan who used to be a former Sith Lord. He's in this village with this droid. This other person who, because this takes place after this feudal Jedi war or whatever that happened. And essentially what it comes down to is this Dark Lord of the Sith woman basically has a few of these former stormtroopers who are now basically bandits along with her, and they decide to go and take over this town. And then he basically decides to go ahead and save them. So he sends his droid after the stormtroopers in order to save the villagers, and then of course he goes after the Sith Lord. And he reveals that he was once a Sith Lord. And then of course, once he defeats her, he basically reveals that, he's been collecting all these kyber crystals, and then gives one to the villagers, says it can ward off evil. And it pretty much is a typical, I would say it's a typical anime storyline. And it's done very much in that style. And of course, this is the kind of stuff that Lucas was influenced by when he did his own stuff.
My thing is, where was all that explained though?
Well, I mean, if you follow the story, it was pretty much a really simple storyline. I mean,
I don't recall them ever talking about like, oh, I'm used to be a Sith Lord, or I'm Ronin, and this. I don't even hear the guy's name. He used this like
they used his name. They used his name. Well, the old dude that was gonna fix his droid or whatever used his name. And then
like this is the end of the. I mean, I heard like, okay, the battle thing, like, but I mean, a lot of that stuff didn't seem like it was really explained. Maybe.
Well, and he revealed that he was a former Sith Lord to her because she was like, how are you so powerful or whatever, and she said something about a Jedi, and he referenced the fact that he used to be, yeah. And then of course his red lightsaber,
of course,
But
it's just, it's a no for me.
So let me get to some of these chats. So Ronaldo says, I read somewhere that all the stories, there are only 2 that are canon. I think I know which ones, but I don't want to spoil anything. Yeah, well, and I mean, like I said, I doubt the next one where some relative of Jabba ends up joining like a rock band or not a rock band. I don't know. I haven't seen it yet. Because like I said, we made a pact. We're going to watch these things one at a time. And the fact that they're all different and they're completely... It makes sense that 2 of them might be canon because, like I said, I read ahead to some of the synopses because I was really curious after seeing the first one. And yeah, some of them... Like, there's one I know that deals with the aftermath of Darth Bane. I could see where some of those would actually be canon, depending on, the storylines. And then some of them are just basically completely, like, they take place in these alternate storylines or whatever. And Dwight said Darryl wanted to get his hair cut first.
He notices everything.
Dwight goes on to say, I thought it was dope, anime in the Star Wars universe. And Ronaldo says, I think it was implied that he was hunting Sith for some reason. Yeah, it does seem that way. I mean, at the end, when he basically opens his coat and reveals the kyber crystals, and they're all red. I would definitely say that totally pretty much reveals that, he's hunting the Sith, which is really interesting to me because him being, it's also weird because in a way it's kind of like, it's implied that he's a former Sith, and it's also implied that he's a Jedi, but he doesn't really expressly say either of those things, really. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of interesting. And then Ronaldo goes on to say, and I think this episode in particular will have a novel. That'd be kind of cool. I'd like to find out more about this character because he's, like I said, it actually, the whole thing gave me Fist of the North Star vibes completely. And the main character was like very much like the main character in Fist of the North Star. Dwight says, yeah, that gave a Grievous vibe. And then Dwight goes on to say, he does say, unfortunately, I'm no Jedi. So yeah, it's kind of, that part of it, you know, they kind of left mysterious, which of course is a typical anime story trope. They do that a lot. And again, if you're a fan of anime and you've seen enough of them, this episode at least, again, I can't speak for the other ones because I haven't seen them, and I know that they're completely different. I mean, they're going to all be in the anime style and everything, and they are done by Japanese animation studios, but they're going to have wildly different styles within that. So it's going to be really interesting. But yeah, the whole mystery of the main character and everything like that, it definitely gave me a lot of Vampire Hunter D and Fist of the North Star vibes, which of course are two of my favorite all-time animes. And I mean, the whole thing was just done beautifully. I really, like I said, I like the whole black and white, except for where technology was focused on. You know, they actually gave you some color. I mean, the animation was just beautifully done. And completely. I mean, right from the opening scene, I'm like, oh yeah, this is definitely an anime. Ronaldo says, by the way, how powerful must this guy be to kill all those Sith? I mean, he seemed like he was really powerful to me. I mean, first of all, she was pretty powerful. Which, again, I thought that Lucy Liu playing her was just a nice touch. But when you really look and stop and see what she was able to do, and then, of course, she was really confident, and then, of course, he revealed himself. Again, a complete anime typical thing that they do in a bunch of them. That actually reminded me of the big cliffhanger in Vampire Hunter D, because they knew that he was a vampire, they knew all this stuff, and he had this really powerful one, and then, of course, he reveals himself to be the son of Dracula, and then it's like, whoa, no wonder. And you actually understand why this guy was so powerful. And that's kind of how Ronan was, where you see that he was kind of quiet about it, but he was very confident. He wasn't afraid. He was just kind of going up against her. And, you know, I also thought it was interesting, too, because I got a little bit of that Luke Skywalker R2 thing from Return of the Jedi when he was kind of like, okay, I need my droid fixed by evening. Or by the time this, like, you know, tea boils or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like as soon as the thing, you know, hits, it ended up being a signal, and he started, you know, doing his thing, which I thought was kind of cool. Let's see. Ronaldo says, if I had to guess, I think that the episodes that you will enjoy the most will be 5, 7, and 9. So you can't just leave us hanging like that, man. You got to tell us, well, why? What is it about episodes 5, 7, and 9, you know, that we can enjoy about this thing? And then Dwight says, what's up with the droid with the whirling weapons? Well, I actually thought that there was a couple of things that were cool. And you guys, before Darryl jumped on, you alluded to it earlier. I brought it up before I even started taking the chats. And that's, I thought that her whole little contraption was cool, where she stuck her katana-like lightsaber in this umbrella-looking thing, and it popped out to be a bunch of them. You know, and then it was sort of spinning. But yeah, they always seem to do that. I mean, that's kind of a Star Wars thing. I think that's more of a Star Wars thing than even an anime thing, where they always have these sort of over the top type of weapons that, if you think about it too much, it may or may not make sense. That's one of the things that I think is a little different about the original trilogy, that's completely different from the prequels and the sequels and everything that's come after it is. And I still think that this is probably why the original trilogy is looked upon as being the gold standard, because while the technology was definitely high tech and everything else, it had a very organic, rounded reality type feel to it.
Mm-hmm.
Where I think some of this other stuff, I mean, it's cool, it's eye candy, General Grievous being, one of the prime examples of that. But I think that in some ways it tends to swing a little bit, I don't know, maybe too fantastical.
Well, I mean, that's kind of like one of the issues that you have when you are talking Star Wars, because it's not science fiction, it's science fantasy. So
Mm-hmm.
you always have to allow one room for that to, be a part of the franchise. But I think when you think of the Force and its concept and really what it's able to allow you to do, yeah, like you should be able to do all this crazy stuff in a way. However, the weaponry, I think that just changed when you had like Darth Maul, because of course he was the first one with the double bladed thing that no one has seen like that before. And then of course now you're always constantly chasing that now. Like, all right, well, what new variation of the lightsaber can we give him now that's, just as cool as a double bladed saber? And I'm like, my thing is, I don't think you really need to. But I think what I think is really awesome about, and you and I talked about this when we discussed lightsabers before, is the fact that they curate the lightsaber to the wielder in a sense where it's tailor made for them. It's designed for their fighting style. So Darth Maul being more acrobatic and more flashy, more showy, yeah, it makes sense that he's got the double bladed lightsaber and he's compensating, of course, for height difference as well. He's a short guy. So if he's going to get someone tall, he needs reach. So it's not just for show, but it's also for actual, for tactical reasons. But then you look at somebody like Dooku, his heel is curved because he has more of a fencing style. I thought that was really cool. So I think for me with the lightsaber stuff, I don't need to see a bunch of different variations. Like the Kylo Ren blade, to me, was kind of stupid. And
Yeah,
gimmicky. I think
and
it was
that's
just
it. I
really
think it was
gimmicky.
gimmicky too. Yeah.
But at the same time, it's, and I
But
get the whole Knights of Ren thing. So it's a knight like
well, and I mean,
sword, and I
I
get
think
it.
even beyond that, see the whole idea behind that, and that's why at first I was kind of put off by it, but then because you just pointed out Maul and Dooku and their fighting styles and all that stuff, whereas Ren being very unhinged and sort of unglued, his lightsaber is also unstable.
Mm-hmm.
And so it required these venting ports in order to, pretty much expel some of this instability. So in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
ways, you could argue that Ren's lightsaber was every bit as personalized or whatever to him as Dooku's was to him or Maul was to him.
Yeah, I think the thing with Ren, the problem with his was the fact that he's still a student though. Like he still hadn't perfected. I don't think he perfected the whole lightsaber building part because he left Luke, and then that's part of the Jedi training. So I don't know if he got like maybe he didn't really study that hard on that information. By the time he went over with Snoke, and he just kind of had what he kind of just just built whatever he could with whatever he had. Maybe that was the case. But I think they were really trying to just do something different. One, and of course, the whole knight or the broadsword basically is kind of what they were mimicking, and that's kind of what George Lucas originally wanted the lightsabers to be like. He wanted them to be like heavy broadswords, and that's why you have the whole slower pace movements that you see in the original trilogy. But of course, you know, when you go back to the prequels, everybody is flipping around and moving really fast with them. So, and I think people just kind of like that style a lot more. It's a lot more fun to watch a lightsaber duel that way than, you know, a typical almost like swashbuckling Earl Flynn type, you know.
Yep. So Ronaldo says, well, wait till you see the twist of episode 5. And then Dwight's like, I can agree with 5 and 7. He hasn't seen 8 and 9 yet. Then Dwight talking about Darth Maul, he was hyper aggressive, and the double-bladed saber was definitely made for offense.
True.
And then Ronaldo talking about episode 8 of Visions is saying it was really fun, but there was one detail that was weird to me. Well, and I think that what's interesting to me is that it seems like with Visions, what they did was they basically said to these guys, like, okay, you know, here's basically all the, you guys understand the whole Star Wars thing, and maybe they gave them additional information, the story group or whatever. And it's just kind of like, okay, do your own interpretation of it. So when you look at it like that, like it's this artistic interpretation of Star Wars, like I said earlier, I could totally understand why everybody is saying that, you know, this is breathing new life in Star Wars, because, I mean, it is. You're no longer basically shackled by the whole Skywalker saga. You're not tied down by any one thing. You can basically, you're free to pretty much play in the sandbox now and take it wherever you want to go. And you're doing it in a style that was actually highly influential on George Lucas himself in the first place. So it's almost like bringing it back to one of its roots. So I'm really curious on what else they do, because, like I said, and you know, you can weigh in on this too, because I'd be curious on your thoughts. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting about it was that it had all the Star Wars sound effects and, you know, everything else, and that actually almost took me out of the story. Because it was almost like, I don't know, I don't want to say it was like too modern maybe for what they were depicting.
Well, yeah, I get what you're saying, but I mean, that's how you make it, I guess, still keep it relative to Star Wars.
Well, that's what I said earlier. I said that's what they were doing, was they were trying to keep the continuity of it. And you have to. And I'm not talking necessarily either about just, you know, I mean, obviously the lightsabers and all that stuff, but but it was really interesting too, because, you know, Ronaldo pointed out earlier that this is definitely, they were very First Order-ish in their look.
Especially the troopers.
Yeah, that's what he was talking about. It's like the stormtroopers were very much. So what's kind of cool about it is that they're mixing and they're matching a lot of these different elements. You know, and that could very well be, because if you really look at the First Order troopers, that fits in, I think, more with the style of anime than maybe the traditional classic ones. But, you know, episode 2, when we get to that, I mean, it's completely different than you guys that have seen it. Obviously, I already know this, but it's completely different. In every episode, like I said, Lucasfilm basically has stated that these are like individual short films. They're going to be kind of similar in a way to that Clone Wars thing, because they're still only like maybe 13 to 20 some minutes or whatever. So they're short. I mean, the Clone Wars ones were like 3 minutes, but, you know, it's just going to be really interesting though, because if you look at it like a short film, like each one of these individually are short films, it does give you a little bit of a different spin on this whole thing. And that's why, you know, I think that it's going to be really interesting moving forward on this thing. Oh, Ronaldo chimes in. Whoops. He says, in your opinion, would you say that the people that worked in this episode understand Star Wars? In my opinion, they do. Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say that was one of the things that I thought was cool, was they perfectly captured a Star Wars influenced traditional anime. Because I mean, there are different subgenres of anime, but if you pretty much, like I said, it kind of leans more towards your Fist of the North Star, Vampire Hunter D, that kind of thing. It's so much in that style. I mean, you could literally take all the Star Wars elements out of it, and you would still have a pretty compelling story. Something that essentially is, I mean, all they're doing is they're basically taking the essence of what Star Wars, what Lucas wanted it to be, kind of that whole samurai-esque vibe, and they just
Right.
concentrated on that. That's pretty much what they did.
Yeah, I mean, I think the jury's still out for me on that one.
Oh
As far
yeah, I
as it,
mean, well, and that's and that's, I mean, that's good. Like I said, this is basically, I mean, we're not some sort of a Star Wars hype machine like a lot of channels are, where it's kind of like, okay, we're, kind of a news thing. I mean, it's like an honest Star Wars discussion.
oh yeah, definitely.
I mean, it's one of those things that, it's, it could, I guess it could have been almost a Duel of the Fates thing because, if you remember, I was actually going to do a little live thing on Facebook just for our Facebook group, similar to what I did with the Droid series that they re-released, and was going to be kind of like, do we even need this? What's the point of this? Right? I was actually going to put out kind of a somewhat disparaging video. I had zero interest in this series. It wasn't until, like I said, and I gave credit where credit was due at the beginning of the show. I said, look, Ronaldo basically said, hey, you guys going to review Visions? And that day, actually earlier, when I was looking up more Star Wars stuff, and I think I was looking up a couple of things to enhance our show, a lot of people have been talking about this show. And that's kind of our
Yeah,
thing. I mean, when you're a YouTube show and you're a YouTube discussion show, it's like, well, I mean, if a lot of people are talking about it, you know.
yeah. I mean, I get it. A lot of kids, a lot of kids, and a lot of people are into anime now, like young adults, and even some older people are really into anime. Like that's a whole that genre has really kind of blown up, massively within the last probably 5 to 7 years. I would probably say, if not longer.
Oh,
But
way longer.
but even my students, that I teach, a lot of them are into, like, I have one girl, she dresses like an anime character like every day, like in her own wardrobe, she's anime. Um, for how she cuts her hair and everything. So it's just like this is a whole culture that I'll admit that I really don't participate in or quite understand. Not saying there's anything wrong with it. It's just really kind of not my bag like that. But I do respect some of the, the things that is done, of course. But I think that's where Star Wars is trying to reach a little bit of everybody, So you got stuff for the anime lovers, all right, you got Visions, or if you're into more political stuff, you might have this. If you like westerns, you got Mandalorian. If you got, if you're into like girl power or something, you probably got the Ahsoka series, and I mean, you're gonna have probably something of everything. And we've talked about this on numerous occasions. We want Star Wars to kind of have these different genres within it, horror films, or different things, so everybody can kind of have their own stake in it, so to speak, in this huge franchise. So I mean, more power to them. But
Yeah,
I'm
well, and
glad
I mean,
everybody's kind of liking it.
yeah, and I think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that, too, again, Lucas was he was basically influenced by the whole feudal Japan kind of thing, the samurai thing that a lot of anime is based on, even though, again, it's expanded well beyond that. I mean, actually, a lot of the anime I like would, it would be considered a little bit old-fashioned, actually. A lot of the
Mhm.
stuff is pretty much moved on from a lot of the stuff. And like I said, I haven't really kept up with it in years. I mean, some of the stuff, if they do a new, because when they released the second Vampire Hunter D movie, and even that was like 15, 20 years ago, it was, I mean, as much as I loved the first one, the second one was really cool. Because it's one of those things that Vampire Hunter D more so even than Fist of the North Star. It's kind of like The Mandalorian is really heavily influenced by a lot of that stuff, which of course they admitted. I mean, it's sort of a Western mixed with kind of that particular samurai lone warrior, which was huge into, in the whole anime thing early on. So that's pretty much at least what this episode is like. And again, I did kind of read on a little bit because I was curious, and I could see, and as the guys on the chat have attested to, it's not like episode 1 is indicative of what the rest of the series is like.
True.
It is kind of all a bunch of anime style stuff, but it's a little bit different. And it's true. I mean, the stuff has influenced the series. I mean, not just The Mandalorian, but just look at the way Sabine is. It's almost like she stepped right out of an anime thing. So it's influenced Star Wars for decades. And so what they're doing now, and that's one of the things that once I saw this episode, I'm like, oh, I don't know which style, the rest of them are going to do. But one of the things that I thought was cool was you're basically getting this particular influence in its purest form. It's kind of like, okay, Star Wars has been influenced by anime for decades. You could point it out in the original trilogy, the prequels, like everything. I mean, even the Jedi themselves. But now they're finally doing, okay, we're just, instead of it being an influence, we're going to now just purely make this, kind of its thing. So that part will be kind of cool. Let's see. There's a couple of chats we got here. So Ronaldo's like, do you like Dragon Ball? Yeah, the Dragon Ball Z I never really got into. That was one of those ones that, I just really, it just kind of wasn't really that appealing to me. It's that kind of anime that I've never really have been all that into. And I mean, there's so much, like I said, I would say the early to mid 90s, even up to the late 90s. So I would say really the whole decade. I was watching a lot of it. I mean, a lot. I had a friend that basically was totally into it. And he was just like, we'd watch like 2 or 3 of them every night. So I started being up on a lot of the different styles. And some of them are quite weird. Like really weird. Sorry, guys. All right, so Dwight basically says, yeah, you guys did bring up that a few shows ago regarding different genre setup in the Star Wars universe. And that's it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Darryl pointed out, this is just yet another genre, really, that they could explore. Now, I think that what we were talking about, though, was maybe something a little bit more influenced and not pure, right? So it's kind of like, I mean, I guess it could be, if you, and this is a good discussion point, too, because this is a good time for us to expound a little bit on the genre thing. So let's just say they do a Star Wars horror film, which both of us would love to see. How much of it, because like if you look at this first episode of Visions, it was almost purely, it was really anime, like a traditional anime with a Star Wars storyline and influence. Like they took elements of Star Wars and put it in this thing. So would you want to see a horror film that just kind of took elements of Star Wars and, you know what I mean? Like, is it more horror or is it more Star Wars, but with a horror vibe?
I would probably say more Star Wars with a horror vibe. For me, I think you can really expound on a lot of different things. When you have the framework of Star Wars, Star Wars follows its own blueprint. There's certain things that just makes Star Wars, right?
Yep.
However, you can add elements to it, or you can make it like, everybody was talking about how the middle movie in the trilogy is always the darker movie. So Empire Strikes Back, The Last Jedi usually has a darker tone. So I could see them making like a movie that's a little bit more horrifying, that's a little bit more creepy. It's a little like, and like I said, the perfect way to do that honestly would be Acolyte. You got somebody who's trying to explore the dark side and you have no idea what you're conjuring up, because see, unlike the light side, you got witches. That's kind of creepy. You got all these different spells. You got, these force sorcerers, and so that can be really dark and really creepy. They've talked about possession. We've seen
Absolutely.
possession happen in Star Wars before with Maul or
Yeah, like that
Savage Opress.
Savage, yeah.
Yeah,
If you
Savage
take
Opress
that whole scene where they kind of were sucking his soul
creating him.
out or doing whatever, yeah, or creating him,
Yeah.
that was almost a pure horror thing right there. And that was kind of chilling actually.
Yeah, and that was an animation. So imagine if that was like on a live scale.
Oh
You know what I'm saying?
man.
Like that's what I mean. Like you could do something like that. Even just that whole scene when Luke went into the cave and Vader, he saw that vision of Vader.
Mhm.
It's had that Dagobah is just creepy in it of itself. There's a lot of planets that they land on that's kind of like is really odd, and we've even said in the High Republic, the Drengir, you know, creepy.
Dude,
Those
those
things
things.
are
Like, could you imagine if you saw that?
that's what I'm saying. Like if you put that in live action and put that,
Oh, dude, yeah.
and that's what I'm saying. Like you can have the Star Wars framework, but you just flood it, you ice the cake with a bunch of horror stuff with it. And I
Oh
think that's
man.
what that's what I'm saying. It's just like the cake is Star Wars, but you ice it with a bunch of horror stuff, and then that's you
Right,
know
versus the cake being the genre thing and then the icing being Star
right,
Wars. Here's
exactly.
something that's cool, and I never really thought of this, and I even have a storyline that can go along with this, but Ronaldo says a horror Star Wars movie with man-eating Ewok sounds amazing.
Or Wookiee eating, or
Well, he says that, everybody thinks Ewoks are cute, but they're actually evil little monsters, which,
yeah.
everybody does overlook the part that they were going to cook these guys and what they
Hmm.
did with the stormtroopers. And in reading that comment, it got me thinking, what if you did a horror film to where there's the whole celebration or whatever, right, at the end of Return of the Jedi, and then,
Hmm.
okay, everybody starts flying off, people are starting to depart, and then it's kind of like maybe there's a few people left or whatever, and then all of a sudden things start to turn and get a little bit more sinister. And
Hmm.
the Ewoks start to, maybe show their true nature a little bit, and then the survivors have to try to hide out or whatever. I mean, that would be kind of a cool way to tie in the whole canon stuff, and
Hmm.
so you could actually get, you know, really really cool. Now, of course, Ronaldo had to say this. You know what else is creepy? Sand. It gets everywhere. But you could do. I mean, Tatooine's another. I mean, granted, Tatooine's a little bit overused probably in the Star Wars universe, but
Hmm.
I mean, you could do
Or
some.
yeah, Tatooine, Jakku. You got even that whole place, the whole in Mandalorian with that giant spider, man. I mean, that thing was creepy. That
That
was
was
horror.
that was definitely kind of a horror vibe. So they have. I mean, with
Yeah,
horror anyway, they've sort of, and then
yeah.
kind
You
of
got
like a,
plenty of stuff.
right. And the closest we got to maybe a romantic comedy would either be some of the Han and Leia stuff, or the Padme and
Anakin.
Anakin stuff, which was a little dopey, but
Yeah,
nonetheless.
and yeah, and you could do all sorts of stuff with that. You can do um a lot of, I guess, if you want to do more of a romantic type thing, because you had that whole storyline where it's in the Clone Wars where Padme was trying to use that banker guy. I think his name was like Klaus or
Oh man,
Clovis.
yes,
Clovis. That's his
yes.
name, Clovis. Yeah, and it was that whole little triangle because she used to date him, or they kind of
Mm-hmm.
dated before Anakin, and then Anakin was getting jealous, and of course, and they kind of were making
Oh
snide remarks to each other.
man,
I mean, that's
yes.
what I'm saying. They've infused a lot of different things, and you could just run with that, especially when you have all these different stories with these pirates and smugglers. Like, it doesn't have to be the Jedi and Sith all the time. So you have all these different types of characters that are kind of, even Lando. Lando was horning in on Leia right under Han, and it's just like
Well, you know what else they could do that would really be cool? And I mean, it kind of fit. Well, it's not a romantic comedy per se, but it does have the whole romantic thing. Is that they started taking a lot of that Dark Disciple storyline
Oh,
where
yeah.
Asajj fell for
Ventress,
Quinlan Voss. You know, I mean,
Voss,
yeah,
yeah.
I mean, Ventress was definitely. I mean, it was
Hmm.
kind of cool how that whole thing turned from they were kind of fighting each other or whatever to by the
Being
end,
like,
they were
yeah.
like deeply in love and everything
Hmm.
else, So that would have been just really cool. Going back to the Ewok thing, Ronaldo says, I think there's a fan film about stormtroopers surviving on the planet Endor and trying not to get eaten by the Ewoks. That would be another cool way to do it. I mean, there are all kinds of things that they can do, and that's one of the reasons why bringing it back to the whole Visions thing. And I think that's why they're calling it Star Wars Visions. I mean, again, I never really thought about it because, frankly, words cannot express how much I did not care about this series when I heard about it. I had no interest in it. I had some interest in how, but the one that was made kind of for kids. Um,
Oh,
oh,
Resistance.
yes, Resistance. And I watched it all, and I ended up liking it. Like I didn't love it, right? I mean, because it wasn't made for me. It
Hmm.
was it was made so much for kids that you could get past it because they did end up dealing with some different themes, and I think that they introduced some really cool characters and they had some cool storylines. But what was cool about that was again, being that I'm a canon junkie, it had some canonical things in it like how it kind of overlapped episode 7 very much the same way that season 7 of the Clone Wars overlapped episode 3. So I was kind of into it for that reason. But I have to admit that halfway through the second and what turned out to be final season, really had to kind of force myself to watch it. I mean,
No
there
pun
were certain
intended.
things where I'm just like, yeah, right. So something like Visions, I had zero interest in only because I knew that it wasn't going to be based on it. Was almost like kind of how Dwight pointed out, kind of like a what if kind of thing, And it was sort of like, I mean,
A
those things can be cool.
concept,
Yeah,
like
like a kind of
concept art, or
concept. And I mean, I enjoy those things for what they are, but there's so much things that are in the canon that I would rather just spend my time doing
yeah.
that. But once people started reacting to this thing and doing our due diligence, being that, we are a Star Wars YouTube show, so I suppose we should cover the thing. But, it's, I have to say that, it's a lot more fascinating than I thought it would be. And I did enjoy the story of the first one. And I like I guess what you would call the cinematography. But it just depends on how the rest of it is, though. It's really going to be interesting. I think that everybody's going to definitely want to watch our reviews because what would actually make for awesome viewing for everybody is if, as it went on, if I loved it more and more and you hated it more and more.
Oh, it's probably gonna happen.
To the point by like episode 5. It's like,
Yep.
oh, my computer doesn't work today.
Oh no, it's gonna work today because I'm gonna make sure
Yeah,
you guys
right.
hear about it. I got to go use my phone. It's gonna happen.
Exactly. You're like chatting in.
Yep.
But I mean, I hate to say it, that would probably make for the most interesting viewing experience.
Oh yeah, we'll be like skipping Shannon Sharp, man. What's
But I have a feeling, honestly, what could very well happen with this is it might just vary episode by episode.
yeah.
I mean, I'm pretty much, because I really didn't have any stake in this series, because it was like I really didn't care about it, to be honest. I'm just kind of going in with it like, all right, let's see what they're doing
Hmm.
and enjoying it for what it is. And I think that that's helping me in a lot of ways because I don't, it's like when they come out with the Acolyte, for instance, I'm going to have some expectations on that I'm
Sure.
going to need met as a fan to determine how much I like it. That's like the closest series I can think of that would deal with this. Ronaldo, man. You gotta love him. He says, what about a romantic comedy with Jar Jar and Julia?
Oh my god.
Forgot all about her. I was his girlfriend in Clone Wars. Misa don't think so.
Right. Exactly.
I don't know. Well, you know what's interesting? One of the things that I've been watching on Paramount Plus, because I got to always bring a Star Trek thing into our Star Wars show. It's been mandatory. There's a series called Lower Decks.
Oh yeah.
It's similar in the sense of it's basically, but it's like a total. It's almost like making fun of a lot of the things in Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
Like all the crazy
all
things.
The guys in that Lower Decks are kind of like talking about what Captain Picard and everybody.
Well, I mean, what it is that they're the ones that are actually doing all the work, and it's just like they'll reference all these like weird things. I mean, man, it is by far the most clever, funniest series. It's actually up there with my favorite Star Trek series.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's just so brilliantly done. And that's what I'm hoping that I see. Even though Visions is a different thing, it is similar in the sense that they're both conceptual, right? They're taking something that's influenced by the series and they're putting a different spin on it, almost like a what if. I mean, Lower Decks isn't really a what if so much as very similar to From a Certain Point of View book. Where
it kind of reminds you of
Lost Stars.
I don't know what Lower Decks. I would say it's more. Well, I mean, it's along that line. But if you want to keep everything Disney, it reminds me of Lion King 1.5.
Yes,
where you kind of have like the other perspective of things that's already transpired, but it's just kind of like you're seeing it from the viewpoint of other people,
right?
And that's exactly what it is. But it's more from the comedic standpoint. Like, okay, yeah, they're all making these orders. Like, yeah, who's going to do that? How you think that's going to happen?
Have you seen it?
No, I've seen trailers of it, but
I haven't actually they had this one thing where, like in last week's episode, where how they always have like the computer that takes over a planet and makes everybody worship them and stuff because it's just they did like this whole thing on that, and I mean it was just so funny, and so I'm really hoping that what we see moving forward with Visions is something along the lines of they're going to take all these different stories and give us something interesting. Now, I can tell you from some of the, like for instance, with episode 2, I'm really going to be curious on next Monday night because with episode 2, I could definitely see some polarization or we might hate it equally because it's basically about this dude his name is Guy, who's a relative of Jabba the Hutt, and he decides to go off and join this band instead of being in the crime syndicate. And then years later, he ends up sending Boba Fett after him and all this stuff. So I'm really curious on how they're going to handle that, because that's one of those types of storylines that I could see that either being really cool or really bad. And then I'm really looking forward to a lot of when you guys are like, oh yeah, episodes 5 and 7. I'm like, okay, what you got for me? Because it was episode, let me see which one they said. I don't know if I put that chat up.
5, 7, and 9.
Well, I mean, there was 5, 7, and 9, but they were talking about one of them. I think it was 7. That's kind of like a master and apprentice kind of thing. So, again, all of these episodes are pretty wildly different from each other. So because of that, I think that it's one of those things that you can't really, it's not like, say, The Bad Batch, where you go, okay, you're 2 or 3 episodes in and you're either like, I love this or I don't like it or whatever. Okay, I have a fair idea how this series is going to be. Because you and I mean, I remember we were like that with Rebels. At first we were kind of like, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of cool, but... And then we got deeper into it, and then it was awesome. And the Clone Wars was even kind of like that. I mean, I think we liked that better at first.
Yeah, definitely.
But season 2 was a huge step up from 1, and 3 was a huge step up from 2. So, I mean, you had that element to where you can pretty much judge the series based on what you were seeing. But with Visions, you can't do that because they're completely different.
Right.
And they're even done by different studios. So that's what's even going to be trickier. So I think this is going to be kind of a wild little ride. I think it's going to make for some interesting viewing.
Yes, the conversations will flow.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I love it, man. That was so cool, you know. Yeah, man, what'd you think? Yeah, kind of wasn't really feeling it.
Nope, it just doesn't have it.
You know, that information would have been really handy to have had at the beginning of the show. Because I'm all like trying to, you know, kind of hype it up and talking about some of the different aspects of it and kind of what I liked about it. Because honestly, at first, I was sort of in the camp that you were in. Even though I kind of recognized it, I'm like, I'm not really sure what I'm watching. And it wasn't until it was getting toward the end that I started processing the rest of the episode. I'm like, okay, now I understand. And then, of course, using my previous anime viewing experiences, I'm like, okay, I get this now. But I can very much understand. Let's put it this way. Without seeing the rest of them, I'm interested in how I'm going to feel on the rest of them because I almost wonder if this was the smartest one to start out with, too.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you know what I mean? It's kind of like we might watch all these and just go, dude, they should have really, 8 should have been the first episode. You know, that kind of thing?
Right. Exactly.
And I remember that you and I kind of made a little bit of an agreement that because we're reviewing these, we weren't going to go ahead and watch, you know, like binge them all.
Yeah.
That we'll take them and we'll do our pure reaction. That's why I didn't watch it till last night. Because, you know, I'm kind of like, okay, man, I just want to watch this thing and then get on here with you and you know, everything else. Ronaldo's like, oh, wait. Let me see. Here we go. Is it? Yeah, I hope you enjoy it, guys.
Yeah, I second.
Hey, man, trust me.
I second that.
I can imagine you probably do, because if not, this is going to be a torturous 9 Mondays for you. It'll be somebody's got a case of the Mondays.
Definitely.
Just like, dude, I got to go on here and talk about this, but hopefully you won't be too cranky about it. But hey, so you know that Darryl wasn't too into it. I actually thought it was really great. But the important thing is, what did you guys think? We know what a couple of the people that were chatting with us thought, but be sure to leave your comments. Do you think that this is a good series? For those of you who maybe have binge watched all of them, what are your overall thoughts on Visions? Is it necessary? Did we need this? Do we care? Let us know in the comment section below. And while you're there, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. Make sure that you watch some of our other episodes. We are going to be reviewing, whether Darryl likes it or not, we're going to be reviewing every episode of this thing. Hey, maybe you're lucky. They basically said that they may not... When asked if they were going to do a season 2, it depends on the reaction to season 1. So we'll see what happens. But Friday, we don't know what we're going to talk about Friday yet, do we?
Not yet.
Not yet. All right. Well, the jury's still out on that. But we'll be with you guys Friday night at 8 o'clock, as we are every week, Monday night at 8, Friday night at 8. We're here for you guys to talk some Star Wars. So until Friday, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Darryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.